What if everything you thought defined you, everything you've worked your entire life to build, was suddenly ripped away in an instant? Imagine waking up tomorrow not just with a different face, but with no identity at all. No career, no relationships, no sense of purpose. Just you, but not the person you recognize. Would you even know who you are anymore? In Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa wakes up as an insect, but the horror of his transformation is far more than the grotesque physical change. It's the unraveling of his entire existence, the destruction of the very foundation of his identity. Kafka doesn't just show us the nightmare of waking up in an alien body. He forces us to confront a far deeper question. What happens when we lose everything we think we are? Today, we're going to explore this terrifying idea. What happens when the roles, the labels, the things we cling to for meaning in life are taken away? How do we cope when we're stripped of our identity, left alone to face the truth of who we are beneath all the masks we wear? The answer lies in Gregor's tragic metamorphosis, and in the profound, unsettling questions Kafka asks all of us, questions about identity, worth, and what remains when everything else is lost. Stay with me until the end, because by the time we finish this journey, you'll be forced to ask yourself one thing. Who would you be if everything you thought made you you was gone? The deconstruction of identity. Imagine waking up tomorrow and everything you've ever known about yourself is gone. No, not just your appearance, not just the face in the mirror or the body that's always been there, but something deeper, that core of who you are, the essence of your identity, the very thing you wake up as every single day. Gregor Samsa wakes up as an insect, but it's not just the shock of the physical change that rattles him. It's the mind-bending loss of his self. It's the rupture between who he was and who he now is. This transformation is more than skin deep. It's the collapse of Gregor's entire worldview. Now here's where it gets chillingly real. Gregor, in his panic, doesn't even have time to process the implications of his transformation. His first instinct? It's not to confront what's happened to him or reflect on his new condition. His first instinct is to get back to work, to provide, to return to normalcy. Do you see the problem here? In his mind, Gregor is still the same man, the man who wakes up early, works tirelessly, and is the sole provider for his family. But in the blink of an eye, his entire self, not just his body, has been upended. And yet, Gregor's first thought isn't to question who he is now. It's to keep doing what he's always done. To serve. To earn. To be the same person he was before, even though he is literally no longer the same. This, my friends, is the crisis of identity. Kafka doesn't just give us a character who's been physically transformed. He forces us to look deeper. He's asking, what happens when we lose the very foundation of who we think we are? When our identity isn't just a set of actions or external roles, but something that's fundamentally tied to our perceptions of self-worth and purpose. Gregor had been the hard-working provider. It was the way he defined himself, the way he saw his place in the world. But now he's a giant insect, trapped in a room, no longer able to fulfill the role he once held with pride. So what happens to someone when their role, when their entire identity, is taken away? The real horror of Gregor's situation isn't that he's turned into an insect. It's that he no longer knows who he is without the work, without the routine, without his place in the family. It's the terrifying realization that so much of our identity can be based on what we do rather than who we are. So what happens when what we do is no longer possible? When the world stops defining us by our actions and we're left to face the quiet, often uncomfortable question, who am I now? But Kafka takes it even further. It's not just about Gregor's struggle to define himself, it's about the erosion of his entire sense of self. The more Gregor tries to force his old routines, the more his identity splinters. He can't move like he used to, can't work, can't connect with his family the way he once did. And every failed attempt to re-enter his old life pushes him further into confusion. This is what Kafka knows. It's what we all experience in varying degrees. When the world no longer sees us in the same light, when we're stripped of the titles, the roles, the expectations we've built our lives on, we start to wonder if we even exist at all. How often have you heard someone say, "I don't know who I am anymore"? It's the kind of statement that sends a chill down your spine because we know deep down that the identity we've carefully crafted is fragile. It can be undone in a second. And when it is, what's left? Gregor's Metamorphosis isn't a freak accident of nature. It's the terrifying illustration of what happens when identity collapses, when everything we thought we were is suddenly questioned. Kafka doesn't just ask you to sympathize with Gregor, he's asking you to face the possibility that you, too, could wake up one day and find yourself utterly alien to yourself. Can you imagine how that feels? The desperation to fit back in, to return to what you once were, but knowing deep inside that you never can? And then the real horror of it all, the question that lurks beneath the surface. What happens when we can no longer do the things that once gave our lives meaning? When we can no longer define ourselves by our work, our productivity, our relationships? Gregor's breakdown isn't just a physical change, it's a psychological one. Because the deeper he goes into trying to return to what he was, the more he realizes that the very thing he held onto for so long, his role, his usefulness, was never truly him at all. Kafka forces us to confront the terrifying question, when everything that defines you is stripped away, who are you, really? Gregor's descent into isolation becomes our own, because we all live with the possibility of losing ourselves. And the more we try to hold on to our old identities, the more fragile they become. So here's the question: what would happen if everything you thought defined you was suddenly gone? Who would you become? And maybe even scarier, who would you stop being? Alienation and the weight of responsibility. Have you ever felt like your worth is defined by what you can give to others? That your value, your sense of self, is determined by your ability to provide, to be useful, to fulfill a role for someone else? Now imagine that one day, you can't fulfill that role anymore. The people who once relied on you, who once loved you, suddenly start to pull away. This is the brutal reality Gregor Samsa faces. When he wakes up as an insect, his physical transformation isn't the only thing that isolates him. It's the emotional distance that begins to build between him and his family. At first, there's concern, there's confusion, but very quickly, concern gives way to frustration, and frustration gives way to alienation. His family starts to view him not as a person, but as a burden. And this isn't just about Gregor being physically different. This is a painful reminder of something Kafka understood all too well. Our relationships are often defined by our ability to serve others, rather than who we truly are. Think about it. Gregor's family relied on him. He was the breadwinner, the provider. But the second he loses that ability, when he's no longer able to work, no longer able to contribute in the way they expect, they begin to pull away. His existence, once valuable because it was useful, quickly becomes something inconvenient, something to be tolerated. They may care for him in the beginning, but it's not long before their patience runs thin. And in that moment, Kafka forces us to confront a painful truth. Did they ever truly love him, or did they only love him because of what he could do for them? This question isn't just about Gregor's family, it's about us. It's about the relationships we have, the way we measure our worth, and the way others measure theirs. How often do we find ourselves asking, do they love me for who I am or for what I can provide? It's a reality many of us face, often without realizing it. In a world that prizes productivity and utility, what happens when we can no longer give, when we can't fulfill the roles others depend on? Do we stop being human to them? Gregor's transformation is Kafka's way of showing us that relationships rooted solely in what we can offer aren't truly relationships at all. They're transactions, they're conditional. The moment we lose our ability to give, we lose our place. We become invisible. Gregor becomes a creature, not a family member. His humanity is reduced to his ability to serve, and once that's gone, so is his family's affection. This is the heart-wrenching alienation Kafka explores, the emotional withdrawal that happens when we are reduced to our utility. Gregor is not just isolated by his transformation. He is isolated because the people who were supposed to care for him, to love him, have no interest in him unless he can serve their needs. When his usefulness fades, so does their attachment. But here's where Kafka digs deeper, and this is where the weight of this story truly lands. What does this say about the nature of our own relationships? How much of our identity is tied to our ability to serve others? What happens when we can no longer provide? When our roles in others' lives are no longer needed? Are we still valuable? Are we still loved? Or do we disappear? Gregor's alienation isn't just an existential crisis, it's a social one. It's a commentary on how we value people, how we treat those who can no longer provide, and how fragile those relationships can be when they are contingent on what we can offer. Kafka forces us to look at our own lives. How much of our identity, our sense of belonging, is rooted in what we can do for others? And what happens to us when that ability disappears? When the things we once defined ourselves by, our work, our achievements, our ability to care for those around us, are no longer possible? Gregor's alienation mirrors a painful truth many of us experience. When we no longer can give, we feel like we have nothing left to offer. And in a world that values output, achievement, and function, what happens when we simply can't? Kafka's critique is sharp and unforgiving. Relationships built on what we do rather than who we are fragile. The moment we stop providing, we risk losing our place. The moment we can no longer serve the roles others have assigned to us, we risk becoming invisible, or worse, discarded. So what does that mean for us? How do we navigate a world that so often asks us to be useful, to be productive, to give until we have nothing left? What happens when we stop being able to give? Do we vanish, or do we finally have the chance to be loved for who we truly are? In Gregor's story, Kafka challenges us to think about the way we relate to others, the way we define ourselves through our usefulness, and what happens when we can no longer fulfill those expectations. This alienation is more than just Gregor's story. It's a story about all of us, and the terrifying moment we realize that our worth has been defined by what we can give, not who we are. Confronting reality. What's truly tragic about Gregor's transformation? It's not just the grotesque physical change, it's what that change reveals about human nature, about the terrifying way we confront our own vulnerability. Gregor wakes up to find himself unrecognizable, not just physically, but existentially. And in the days that follow, it becomes clear, the true horror isn't the insect body. It's the slow, crushing realization that the world around him has ceased to recognize him. Gregor's existence was once bound up in his roles. As a worker, as a provider, as a son, these were the things that gave him purpose. These were the things that made him who he was. But now, stripped of all those labels, of everything that had defined him, he's forced to face a terrifying truth. What happens when everything that made you you is taken away? We've all had moments when the things we cling to, our jobs, our relationships, our image, are called into question, or worse, lost. What are we then? What do we become when the very foundations of our identity crumble beneath us? Kafka doesn't just ask this question through Gregor. He forces us to ask it of ourselves. When we are stripped of our roles, our labels, and our purpose, who are we left with? At first, it's easy to dismiss Gregor's transformation as some bizarre external event, a freakish accident that happened to him. But Kafka's brilliance lies in the fact that Gregor's story is a reflection of all of us. It's not just the literal transformation that matters, but what happens when we're faced with our own vulnerability. What do we do when the things we thought defined us start to unravel? What do we do when we can no longer hide behind the roles society has given us? Kafka wants us to confront the uncomfortable reality that, in a world that prizes achievement, usefulness, and appearance, there's always a point when those things are no longer enough. And in that moment, we are left standing naked in front of ourselves, with no distractions, no roles to play, no titles to hide behind. This is the existential disintegration Kafka explores in the Metamorphosis. The real horror of Gregor's fate isn't the grotesque metamorphosis, but the loss of his place in the world. He was once important, once central to the lives of those around him. Now he's nothing but an object of disgust, something to be hidden away. And it's in this horrifying isolation that we come to see the bleak reality of human existence. Our worth is so often tied to what we do for others, what we can provide, how we appear. But what happens when we can no longer perform those roles? When we are forced to confront our own fragility, when the very essence of our identity crumbles and we're left to question who we are, it's almost as if the ground beneath our feet disappears. It's terrifying, isn't it? This is what Kafka understood, that we all fear the moment when the world stops seeing us for what we do and starts stripping away everything we've used to define ourselves. And it's in that moment of crisis that we face the most profound question of all. Who are we when we lose everything we thought made us, us? Gregor's story forces us to reckon with the harshest truth. We are more fragile than we care to admit. We build identities based on what we do, on how we are seen by others. But the moment those things are taken away, we are left exposed. We are forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that without those external validations, we are often left to wonder if we even matter. Kafka's message is haunting. Our value is not just in what we can do, but in what we are willing to face about ourselves. The moment we lose everything, the moment we are laid bare, is the moment when we can either disintegrate entirely or finally confront the truth of who we are, stripped of the masks we've built over a lifetime. Gregor's tragic fate is a reflection of a deeper, more existential truth. The metamorphosis isn't just about a physical change. It's about the transformation we all go through when forced to confront the reality of our own vulnerability. The question Kafka asks us is uncomfortable, almost painful. Who are we when the world stops recognizing us for what we do, and instead forces us to face the things we've been avoiding about ourselves? So ask yourself, when everything is stripped away, when the world no longer sees you as you once were, who will you be? Kafka's brilliance lies in making us confront that question and in forcing us to reckon with our own existential fears. The Metamorphosis is not just Gregor's story, it's the story of all of us and the transformation we all undergo when faced with our own fragility. Embracing the Metamorphosis. Kafka's The Metamorphosis isn't merely a tale of a man turned insect. It's a profound meditation on identity, alienation, and the fragility of the self. Gregor Samsa's transformation, while grotesque and surreal, serves as a mirror that reflects the uncomfortable truth that the things we define ourselves by can be torn away in an instant. It forces us to ask, what remains when the roles we cling to are no longer available? As we've seen, Gregor's tragedy doesn't lie in his physical form, but in the loss of his place in the world, the collapse of his identity. What Kafka presents to us is the devastating realization that when we can no longer serve, provide, or fit into the world as we once did, we risk being forgotten. But there's a deeper layer to this. Kafka asks us to confront who we are beneath the surface, beneath the labels we wear and the roles we perform. In a society that often defines us by our achievements and our utility, the Metamorphosis forces us to consider the cost of living in such a system. It makes us question the relationships we maintain. Are we truly loved for who we are or for what we can give? And when we lose the ability to give, are we still worthy of love and connection, or do we simply vanish into the background? At its core, Kafka's story is an invitation an invitation to face our own vulnerability, to question the very foundations of our identity, and to reckon with the parts of ourselves that we often try to ignore. Gregor's journey, painful as it is, challenges us to look deeper into our own lives and ask, who would we be if everything we've built ourselves upon were suddenly gone? In the end, the metamorphosis isn't just about one man's existential crisis. It's about all of us, in our moments of loss, doubt, and transformation. It's about confronting the reality that, as human beings, we are more fragile than we care to admit. But it's also about the possibility of rebirth. For in the aftermath of disintegration, there lies a chance to rebuild, to redefine ourselves not by what we do, but by who we truly are. So as we close today's exploration, I leave you with this question. When the world strips away everything that defines you, who do you become? Kafka's answer is haunting, and perhaps more unsettlingly, it is ours to discover. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to keep exploring thought-provoking topics like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on our future journeys into literature, philosophy, and psychology. And of course, share your own thoughts in the comments. I'm eager to know what you think about the crisis of identity and what remains when everything we define as us disappears. See you in the next video.